Yes, it really is. While the biggest media outlets and YouTube channels want to promote this project that can hardly be called a video game, there is a massive wave of haters that cannot actually frame adequately what pisses them off about it exactly. So I decided to help them with that regard. First, it's not a game at all. Second, it's a badly written and badly performed interactive movie with the characters that are neither relatable, neither friendly, neither lovable, nor absurdly entertaining. But what is the most important? It's a brainwash attempt made by the ones who hated their own generation while they were young, but now reduce it to a bunch of symbols to create fake narratives to the Gen Z to make them feel the coming of age period somehow differently than they do nowadays. Point 1. The game wants to create the outsider characters in the 1990s, but totally misses their looks, their words and their voices and the overall socio-cultural background that made them. If you grew up in that decade, like I did, you know that being an alternative kid was never a fashion statement. It was never considered to be cool. Notably, if you were trying to get popular by being alternative on purpose, you'd be mocked. In reality, it was a defense mechanism against the world that was becoming increasingly commercial, increasingly loud, and most importantly, increasingly hollow. It was the first generation that had no foreseeable future in a world of mass media channels, billboards, and growing consumerism. It was the first one to completely deny and completely reject the norms of their parents and grandparents. It was detached and always labeled by the media as spoiled, lost, illiterate, ignorant, arrogant, and entitled to everything. I still remember those years, and to be frank, I want to forget them for good. We were called the New Lost Generation, the MTV generation, the misfits, the slackers, the lost boys. If you were an outsider which was never considered to be cool or hip or trendy, you occupied completely different reality, not just a different music taste. So when Mixtape tries to picture these three outsiders, it gives us three characters who look and talk like they were designed by a marketing team in 2026. Trying to guess what edgy looked like in 1994. The characters in this game talk a lot with the self-awareness of like modern influencers. They act like they know they're in the coming-of-age movie, and that's already what makes people completely mad about it. Point 2. The choice of music in this game makes completely no fucking sense. Vast majority of the songs used in the levels of the games are from the 60s, from the 70s, from the 80s, and like a brief collection, like 3 to 4 songs from actually 90s. That collection was considered to be like the dead rock of our generation that we were trying to get away from, while the numbers from the 90s are mainly misrepresented, like Luscious song that's called the first to be called shoegaze, the character says, is actually and arguably a dream pop song. I know that these two genres are being used interchangeably nowadays, but for those shoegaze fans who happen to be watching this video, let me ask you, what was the biggest shoegaze record of the 1990s? You would probably say Loveless, and that was, by the way, a real shoegaze record. But who cares if the luscious Wikipedia page is easier to read and retranslate? And by the way, the desire for finding a space and a scene was so big for us that we would tear each other's faces over what's shoegaze and what's dream pop, so just saying. It's true, we've got some light touches from the 90s, like the song from Smashing Pumpkins, The Portishead, Silverchair, and we've got a 2011 synthwave banger from Mitch Murder. Just to highlight how backwards nostalgia is more important here than the actual core of the 1990s. If the game actually wanted to depict the outsider experience, the soundtrack would be jacked, uncomfortable, and a revolutionary mess. It would be visceral industrial rage of Nine Inch Nails, the street-level defiance of NWA, self-loathing anthems of Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and the alt-rock alienation of Radiohead. It would include the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of Korn and Deftones, the DIY aesthetics of Fugazi, the ethereal escape of Slowdive, and the raw, unblinking vulnerability of Pixies and Tori Amos. These were the artists that had the songs depicting real anxieties, real emotions, and real experiences that were never seen in the mainstream before. Mixtape reduced almost every musical piece to a one-sided background noise as another prop for that whole circus. By reducing the 90s culture to a set of symbols like cassette tapes, handheld consoles, and shoegaze-light tracks, the game turns our history into a set of props for a teenage Target advertisement. So this is literally straight-up cultural appropriation and monetization of nostalgia. It tells Gen Z that our youth was a curated collection of cool gadgets and vintage sounds. It erases the socio-cultural background that made us who we were. It ignores the fact that we were the first generation to realize that the American dream was for those who is asleep to believe in it. We didn't play handheld consoles just because they were retro cool. We played them because we were bored out of our minds in a world that offered us nothing else except retail jobs and student loans. We didn't make mixtapes because it was like a cute little hobby, haha. We made them because it was the only way to share our actual selves in a world dominated by the same 30 songs on the radio. When Mixtape presents these items as cool aesthetic choices, it gaslights the new generation. It tells them that the struggle of being young is just a series of cool moments that you can buy back later. It mocks the actual millennials who lived through the era by telling them that their pain wasn't real, to tell that Gen Z's angst is not real too. So it's not really an interactive movie about the heart of the 1990s, it's a corporate funeral for the 90s, where the body is dressed in a lush t-shirt and the mourners are being charged for the privilege of watching the casket lower. It's a complete denial of the culture that once stood as a middle finger to the whole corporate world. Now, the corporate world has eaten this middle finger in full and sold it back to you as a gamepad cover. Point 3. The story wants so bad to be the newest catcher in the rye, but it never understands what made it resonant in the first place. It was never really a story about an alt kid doing rebellious things. It was a devastating study of a broken human being. Characters from the mixtape, by comparison, are real no-names who have been hollowed out to make the room for players' projection. They don't really seem to struggle with the existential weight of the upcoming adulthood. They look for cheap liquor, disrupt public spaces, and misbehave. That's what the whole millennial generation has been reduced to. The one that looks for cheap thrills, dreams in their heads too much, gatekeeps their secrets, and disrespects the older ones. Mixtape has turned the downward spirals of teenage mentality into a fun gameplay vignette, like joyriding in a shopping cart or throwing toilet paper rolls. All of these are literally mocking the experience of living in that age. So Mixtape basically tells them that being broken is just a prelude for a cool transition, and that is really fucked up. The devs have taken the whole generation's genuinely mental health struggles, their fears about the mechanization of the whole attention, and their feeling of being lost, and turned it into a gameplay loop with no failsafe. By the way, if you never read Catcher in the Rye, it's high time you read it for the first time or reread it, at least once. Honestly, it's not my favorite book to read, but it is definitely a resonating one. Holden Caulfield was annoying, he was repetitive, he was snob and an edgelord, but he was real. You wouldn't want to spend 5 minutes around him, but you understand his pain. These no-names of the mixtape are literally the opposite. They are designed to be spent time with. They are quirky and edgy in all the ways that look good on social media feed, but they have no internal life. They are just props for the music. If you remove the licensed soundtrack, the characters go poof and disappear. They are a reflection of a corporate culture that views millennials as a demographic to be mined rather than a generation to be understood. Ultimately, we're all being told that our youth is nothing more than a series of jackass-style stunts and edgy music choices. Point 4. As millennials, we often forget that even in our darkest moments of isolation, we had a getaway car. We had the early internet, the wild west of the digital age. It was a chaotic, unmonitored frontier of weird forums, niche blogs, and underground file sharing that allowed us to escape the suffocating reach of the corporate world. We could disappear into subcultures that hasn't been tracked by the algorithm yet. But look at the world now. The corporate world has achieved total enclosure, total coverage, everything is here. So there is no new internet for the Gen Z to escape to. Nowadays, every digital frontier is monitored, owned, governed, and monetized before it even has any chance to breathe. So while I think about it and while I speak about it right now, I believe that Mixtape is not really a bad game. And it's not really a bad movie, because it's not a game and not a movie at all. It's a gaslighting tool. Because Gen Z has nowhere to run, the corporate machine has to create the gaslit version of the past, a curated reservation, so they stay calm, obedient, and nostalgic for a rebellion they aren't allowed to have. The corporation stands here literally with a headset in one hand and a coming-of-age script in the other, and says, "See? The older ones were the same as you. They were just as lost. They listened to the same cool songs and they turned out fine." But we didn't. We turned out as the first generation in history to be poorer than our parents, struggling with the fallout of the digital industrial complex and the tabloidization of the whole algorithm. We didn't solve the problem of isolation, we just became the first generation to mine our own data for further monetization and creation of new products to sell. By telling Gen Z that we have turned out fine, the corporate narrative erases both our actual struggles and our current failures. In certain aspect, it's a way to neutralize the anger of the youth. If Gen Z believes that every generation has this specific crushing weight, that it always resolves itself in a cinematic montage, they won't look for systematic exits. They'll just wait for their own mixtape moment, while staying bored, staying isolated, staying depressed, but most importantly, staying obedient enough to consume and keep on buying. You know, the corporate machine really likes the idea of the rebel, as long as the rebel is wearing the right brand. Mixtape teaches Gen Z that rebellion is just an aesthetic choice, not a structural one. It tells you that as long as you have the correct outsider music and the right retro gadgets, you are successfully coming of age. It replaces the genuine struggle of finding meaning with a set of consumerism milestones. This is why they need to mock millennials while they gaslight Gen Z. They have to mock us, like us, to ensure that the new generation doesn't look to us for actual advice or revolutionary energy, whatever that means. They turn us into a joke, the gatekeeping, entitled, dreamer generation of caricatures, so that our real warnings about corporate enclosure are dismissed as millennial whining. When we are marginalized as an insufferable demographic, they can safely sell the shards of our culture to the kids as a lifestyle brand. And what is the most tragic, millions of millennials work on this shite right now. Instead of our own digital world back then, they have digital panopticon filled with aesthetic memories of the 90s. Thus, the corporation ensures that Gen Z never feels the need to build something truly new. Why build a new alternative when you can just download a curated version of the pre-approved one? Mixtape was never an invitation to be out of this world. It's an invitation to be a consumer of a creative past. Turns all the symbols of our escape into nostalgia as a service. It tells the youth that there is really nothing outside of corporate lands, not even their own memories. It claims that the coming of each period is a product they can experience for money rather than a dangerous internal revolution against the whole world. And we need to be honest in this regard. We created the technology that allowed this BS to happen. We built the tools of the attention economy, and now we're watching them to be used to gaslight our successors. So these polished characters, this synced music, the vibe-heavy gameplay, it's all a facade. It's really a corporate apology for a future they have already sold off. So, a note to Gen Z if you are still watching. Don't believe this bullshit. We weren't the same, we didn't turn out fine, we are still fighting the same phoniness that Holden Caulfield saw, but now it's wearing VR headsets and calling itself an interactive vibe experience. The coming of age you see in Mixtape is a trap. It's a mockery of our history designed to make you stay calmer, more obedient, and more invested in the aesthetic of the life than the reality of it. Don't let them curate your angst. The corporate world says it understands you, but it's only trying to mirror you on your digital screen, so you don't look away and search for something else and, God forbid, find yourself. And remember, real life never had a curated soundtrack, and that's what made it